Russia is determined to attack and test NATO countries. What confirms is they're on the balls of their feet. They picked up this thing and destroyed it, quite some way before it could have become a danger. Russia is determined to attack and test NATO countries. Even a small drone like this in a big sea like the Black Sea, that we are going to identify it and we are going to destroy it before it has an impact. And you, Russia, are going to be made to look like the aggressor, and you are the ones who are going to suffer ultimately in the long run. There was a drone, a maritime drone, quite a sizable one, that was seen in the vicinity of this very important gas facility. And F-16 jets from the Romanian Air Force were scrambled and destroyed it. The Romanian government are saying that this is Russian action, most likely, a Russian maritime drone, or certainly one of their proxies. We have seen, first of all, the CIA, the American intelligence agency, saying they expected that Russia might well attack a European NATO ally to test them, to test their resolve. That could be some sort of incursion over land, or it could be attack of critical national infrastructure, or it could be something like a cyber attack. So this sort of all fits in. And only a few days ago, we heard the Russian ambassador to London threaten to attack British facilities because British drones have been used to attack Russia. So it seems entirely plausible that this was an act by Russia. And I think the Russians have seen quite how effective the long-range strikes from Ukraine, ostensibly the air drones that have been attacking critical national infrastructure, the oil industry, the gas industry in Russia, really bringing Russia to its knees as far as particularly with petrol and diesel production are concerned. And on the other hand, we've also seen how effective Ukraine maritime drones have been in the Black Sea, pretty much destroying the Black Sea fleet, the Russian Black Sea fleet, or at least moving it so far out of the way it couldn't have an impact. I tend to agree what the Romanian government are saying. This is likely a Russian attack. And it's also, I think a lot of people are expecting Russia maybe to attack the Baltic states in the north, Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, or even one of the major NATO European countries like perhaps Germany or the UK. So to attack one of the smaller countries that have probably a less capable military, sort of, if I put my military strategic hat on and I was a Russian general, that would sort of make sense. I think what we have learnt from this is that absolutely the Romanians, and there is a sort of tripartite grouping in the southern Europe of Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey, who work together very much to sort of cover the Black Sea and the southern part of European NATO countries. What confirms is they're on the balls of their feet. They picked up this thing and destroyed it, quite some way before it could have become a danger. So it tells us an awful lot about a lot of things, that Russia is determined to attack and test NATO countries, but actually NATO countries, including some of the ones that we weren't quite sure how good their military were, have really shown that actually they're pretty good and up to the task. One assumes it was packed with, several hundred kilograms of high explosive. So yeah, it could have severely damaged the platform, I expect. Again, I'm no good expert on these platforms, but we've seen the devastation that Ukrainian drones have destroyed, big Russian ships and Russian submarines, and these things are probably of a similar size. So one would have thought it would have done considerable damage to the platform and probably taken it offline for a considerable amount of time. We're seeing that some of the drone strikes against the Russian oil industry are taking some of those refineries offline for 6 to 12 months. So I expect that's rather than the physical damage, it's preventing the thing working that was probably the aim. And again, one can only speculate, but it looks like the drone is of the size that could severely damage that platform. It's highly likely it is part of the Russian hybrid warfare campaign against NATO. We've seen an awful lot of sabotage across Europe. We've seen warehouses in London being firebombed by Russian proxies. We've seen cyber attacks. We've seen Russian ships, merchant ships acting as lily pads, if you like, launching drones into various military bases across the UK. And we've seen activity all across Europe, which is classic Russian espionage, which is the key element to a hybrid war. You know, hybrid war is sort of just short of bombing and fighting and tanks fighting. So, yeah, this makes, this is pretty clear that that's what it is. And I think the other thing, the Russians are trying to replicate, I expect, what the Ukrainians are doing. And the Russians are seeing how deadly attacks on their national infrastructure, particularly that produces power, the oil and gas industry. So if Russia could damage European gas industry, in this case, in Romania, then that would make sort of sense, as it were. So people should be in no doubt that Europe or NATO is very much in a hybrid war with Russia. But what is really gratifying about this particular case is that, first of all, there have been no casualties that we know of, and that the Romanian Air Force have been able to interdict this drone and destroy it before it's been able to create any damage. Well, it needs to be vigilant, and the tripartite group, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, are best placed to police Black Sea, which they seem to be doing. And the fact that they've done this is absolutely right. No doubt it will be not a wake-up call, because I think all NATO countries are on the balls of their feet expecting Russia to attack them, particularly those countries bordering either Russia or Belarus or Ukraine. We've seen seepage of Russian drones and missiles into Poland that presumably were fired at Ukraine, although it could well be part of Russia testing NATO as well to claim that they're firing at targets in Ukraine, or actually they're firing at targets in NATO. So it's vigilance, and it's being made sure that you've got forces ready to repel these sort of attacks as they occur, and most importantly, to deter them. Hopefully this will be a deterrence to Russia to see that actually it's not had the impact that it would hope to have. But I'm sure that won't be the end of it. One anticipates, and Russia keeps telling us and telling us here in the UK that they're going to attack us, and we have to be made sure that we're absolutely ready to interdict anything and ideally destroy any threats before they create casualties or damage across Europe or in the UK. An attack like this, if it had been successful, whether NATO would then launch something in response, I expect if it was an isolated incident, probably not. NATO would probably make an awful lot of this and tell Russia that any escalation would be met with an overwhelming conventional response. So I am not sure that this type of attack would be termed what we call Article 5. And Article 5 is a direct attack on NATO, where if it was deemed an Article 5, then NATO would respond conventionally as well. So I don't think this would do that. I think NATO would hopefully keep interdicting all these threats before they materialise, so that the Russia realises that there's no point. However, if there was a major incursion in perhaps the Baltics or somewhere else, then there are NATO forces, there are British forces stationed in Estonia, for instance, who I'm sure would repel those attacks, with overwhelming force. and that's the message that NATO wants to get across. And I think, I'm sure the Russians who are struggling in Ukraine at the moment, I'm not entirely sure they've got the spare military capacity to do very much more than they're doing at the moment, like this single maritime drone in the Black Sea. We don't know the full details behind this maritime drone yet. And I'm sure, NATO would ideally pick these sort of threats up as early as possible. But NATO has to be very careful where it sort of interdicts these threats. If NATO would want to avoid destroying Russian equipment, be a maritime drone or an air drone in Russian airspace or Russian sea lanes, for instance. So, no, I think this is probably more of a positive message coming from NATO to Russia that actually, even a small drone like this in a big sea like the Black Sea, that we are going to identify it and we are going to destroy it before it has an impact. And you, Russia, are going to be made to look like the aggressor, and you are the ones who are going to suffer ultimately in the long run. I think potentially across the whole of European NATO countries, one must expect attacks, and no doubt cyber attacks are happening all the time. The same with espionage as well. But I think it's becoming more difficult for Russia to do that because people are much more aware now, and espionage has been going on, since the end of the Second World War, but we're much more aligned to it. Attacks like the one we've seen of Romania, they will probably increase. We will no doubt see more drone and missile incursions over the borders into the Baltics, maybe into Poland and elsewhere. And what is important is that NATO reacts the same way each time. And, drones and missiles are shot down, maritime drones are destroyed, and, any sabotage is called out for what it is. I think Russia needs to understand that we know pretty much everything that they're doing, and anything they do is not going to help them. The only thing that's going to help them is to come to the negotiation table, have a ceasefire in Ukraine, and give a just peace deal to Ukraine, who has been so badly wronged by the illegal Russian invasion over 4.5 years ago. To use maritime drones in anywhere but the Black Sea, I think they will find that incredibly difficult. You can't really see them operating in the Mediterranean. Having said that, of course, Ukraine has operated, far away from Ukraine. Even the Caspian Sea, it destroyed, an Iranian freighter heading towards Iran full of Russian weapons only a few weeks ago. So I expect Russia would like to be able to try and do that sort of thing. But again, I think the surveillance capability and the intelligence assets that NATO has available to it are probably far more sophisticated, modern and comprehensive than anything that Russia has.